Step 15 is the scheduling review of the specifications. So we want to go through the spec, and you may or may not have a spec. If you do have a spec, it's in your specification section 013201.00.10. So, this spec is a UFGS spec. It stands for Unified Facility Guide Specification, and this is like a 19-page specification. Goes into great detail. It is really great for if you really know what you're doing and know what you're reading, but it can be difficult to understand. What I have done is I've created this cheat sheet. You can go down here, and you can see I've created this cheat sheet that goes through the same specification review, but it kind of summarizes everything, and that's what I'm going to do for this video. So you have to have something you can reference against as a guide, and that's what we're doing here. If you don't have a spec, you still need something to reference against to make sure everybody is complying with some type of standard guideline. Okay, this is a good guideline that like I said, good guideline sheet that I have put together. So UFGS is used primarily by the Corps of Engineers or NAFAC, but it also maybe the VA, but not really used in commercial. You need to know that 013201 is a specification section. If it has one, great, but it may not have one. Okay, so this IPS cheat sheet that I'm showing you here, we're going to walk those individual items. Now at this point, you have gone step 1 through step 14. You put the schedule together. So we're going to go through and kind of do some cleanup work here. And the first thing we're going to do is look up here and says the project schedule tech spec. Have you gone through it? Okay, do you have one? That's what this says right here. The next thing is do we have the SF1442? If you're working on a commercial job, it's not going to have it, but there's some type of award documents, and the award documents will tell you when you started, when you're going to start, when you're due to finish, what the dollar value is. So we can go back here to the schedule and we can say, okay, when are we due to start and when are we due to finish? Okay, well, the first activity, which is notice to proceed, if we go to the status, we can see that it doesn't have any date in here. We can constrain it with a date, but if we go to project, that particular project will have a planned start date of 5 July, right? You can actually put that in the activity itself, but it's, it is banded by, if you go to project, it has that information. Does it have a set completion date, a constraint on the completion date? So we can go all the way down to construction and go all the way to the bottom and look at the contract completion date. And yes, we have a finish on or before a specific date. Does a total dollar value that we have, the 727 match up with our budget, 727,000. Does that match up with the budget? So that kind of covers, what would be contained in that award letter. NTP, the notice to proceed letter, will give you the start date. Does that start date match up with the start date that we put in the schedule? Any other contractual dates? We may have a contractual date for phasing or a specific requirement to do something. We need to review the specifications. We need to review the award documents or the bidding documents and verify that we don't have any other constraint dates we have to put in the schedule. If we do, we go through and we simply do what we did on the contract completion. We go and we add a constraint by going to the status tab and go and say what type of constraint it is, and then put a date. Next, the schedule values. Does the schedule, when I think of schedule values, most people think of a Word document somebody put together that has all the ways we're going to bill. That's truly not a schedule of values. A schedule of values is a schedule with dollar values attached to it, like we have here. Does this dollar value match up with, what we have in the contract? That's what it's asking. Are there any mandatory tasks in the specification? It may say, hey, you need to have some mandatory tasks like NTP and plan reviews and contract completion and substantial completion and those type of items. So we want to make sure that we have all those in the schedule. Do we have to have reviews and approvals in the schedule? What kind of specific submittal review and approval durations? It will say in the specification, the government will have, or the owner will have 14 days to review submittals. We need to make sure that the schedule we have complies with that requirement. Are we given enough time for them to review? We're given 10 days. If it said 14 calendar days or 10 work days, we'd have to work that out in the schedule. And here we have work days. We can look at the calendar. We can say, oh, it's a 7-day calendar. It's only 10 days. We need to maybe take it to 14. Okay. So, so if we move on here, as far as the way we submit the schedule, most of the time in today's world we submit them electronically. We'll put them on, say, like a Dropbox or FTP site where they're able to open these files. We're going to give them the XCR file, which I go over later. We're going to export it to an XCR and name it appropriately. And step number 20, I go through that of how to name it. You want to make sure that you also have hard copies, or hard copy / PDF copies. All right. So these are some of them which I go through in the reports section. These are some of the reports that are necessary. Nice thing about Primavera, it has a lot of these reports automatically built into it. I showed you some of the reports that, in the report step in the report step video. I showed you some of them, but it simply is just going into tools, reports, and then if I'm going to look for, say, a logic report, in the standard database that you should be given with the software, there should be a logic report built into it. Now, I hope this doesn't make me a liar, but there it is right there. There's a logic report by project. So you click on it, you right click, you run the report, and it's going to put together a logic report for you, and you can see what it looks like. It gives you all the logic, what the predecessor and successors are. So, but all the different reports that are outlined here are going to be contained in that. You have the narrative, which is a Word document outside the software. Network diagram, I'll show you how to do those, but all these reports will be in there. So now let's go to the general schedule review. Is the data date equal to the NTP date? Remember that the baseline schedule is, we don't have a data date. We're not updating it yet. So we want to go to the project and make sure that the plan start date and the data date are the same. So we want to make sure those are the same for the baseline schedule. Does the contract completion NTP, does it have an early start date constraint on it? And in this case here, we went through it. It has a constraint on the entire project, but we may need just to go in here and say, okay, NTP, you need to have a constraint, a start on date of July 5th. So does the contract completion have a constraint date on it? So, as I shown you before, you go to the contract completion date, and, it does. It has a finish on constraint of a date. And it's important you have those, because then you're able to actually use the float numbers. Are there other constraint dates put in it? Remember, we should have no other constraint dates except for those two, unless the specification says otherwise. Is the retained logic not progress override being used? Now, this is something that that only Primavera does, but you can simply go in here and go to the options, the schedule button, and you can either select retain logic or progressive override. As a norm, it should always be retain logic. You don't want to have progressive override. So we're going to verify that's correct, close it, and then hit schedule. The critical activities, define the longest path. Does it make sense? So then we go through and we say, okay, let's go through and make sure that the critical path is the longest path. So we go to the options, and we have it as the longest path. We hit schedule, and then we we'll sort it, and you see we came up with some negative numbers there, which is not good. So we got to get rid of that. But then we go through the critical path, and we can simply look at the critical path, and we can filter it by critical only, and we can look only at the critical path task. And we can look through here on this side, and we can say, okay, well, let's zoom in a little bit, and we can look to see if this makes logical sense. Does this sequence make logical sense? Then we have, any logic, no open-ended logic. What I do is I go through every task, and I figure out, go into relationships, and I see if it has a predecessor and successor. You can do that. In addition to that, I've created my own filter that actually will go through here and ask, okay, and I don't have it shown right now, but is it a closed network? So remember, a closed network is only two activities don't have a predecessor successor. NTP doesn't have a predecessor, and contract completion date doesn't have a successor. Every other task should have a predecessor or successor. That is a closed network. Any mandatory tasks, are they in there? Pre-construction submittals and review. Do we have all the pre-construction submittals and review that are necessary in there? Are our descriptions verb, noun, quantifiable? When I go back here and look, I put install exterior, HMF, plumbing rough-in. Well, so instead of being plumbing rough-in, how about we put rough-in plumbing? So we want to have it verb, noun, quantifiable, right? So action item, then the noun, and if it's not 100%, then we put a percentage. But otherwise, we assume the quantifiable is 100% if it is. So we went through the descriptions, level of detail. The ideal duration should between, and I talked to you about this before, is between 2 and 12 days. Are most of the activities between 2 and 12 days? Remember, the level of detail is really determined by the reviewer, but if you keep my rule of thumb of 2 to 12 days, you should be fine. No activity except pre-construction activities should be greater than 20 duration days. You can have procurement activities, but you can't have any of the other ones. Are durations in? Do they have lag? We want to make sure if we have lags in here, if we have any kind of lag number here, it's not negative. We don't want negative numbers. Are material long lead items in here? Do we have long lead items? Is it broke out to procurement, fabrication, delivery? That's important because you can't put dollar values on fabrication. You can only put dollar values on delivery because you can only claim revenue when it's actually delivered to the project site. Do we have the correct calendars put in? So we could actually go through and we could add a column here, and the column could be a task calendar. Let's see in here, maybe under general, and then calendars, and we can put the calendar in here, and then we can look through all the calendars and make sure we have the right calendars involved. Remember, if we want to put more than one calendar, we can hold the shift key down, and then we can fill down, right? So that's helpful. So are the correct calendars assigned? And is there specific coding requirements? That's a whole nother ball game with coding, but coding is a whole different step requirement, and don't have a lot of time to go through it here, but you can actually assign coding to the activities in here. The coding that would be required are, how many workers do we have? Who's responsible for it? What area it is? Is it a modification? What CLIN number it is? What phase number it is? What category it is? What feature work it is? All those items have to be coded into each individual activity. And you can see, so I could assign each of these individual activities have codes in them. And then schedule values matches budget, of course, and then any other additional requirements that may be necessary. We didn't have a lot of time to go through coding here, but that's a very important topic about how to code a schedule, and I'll create a separate item on that. So that covers the schedule spec review.